Mark Locke. I'm the creative director of Titanic, the Artifact exhibition here in Orlando on International Drive. The exhibition is a collection of over 100 artifacts recovered from the ocean floor and additional objects that really tell the full story of the Titanic, real objects, real pieces of history that talk about this true story. Of course, we're here in Orlando, we always think of fantasy rides and things that are made up, but this is the actual story of the Titanic told through the actual artifacts recovered from the ocean floor. It's really a trip through the whole story of the Titanic. You know, Titanic was built as one of 3 ships, the largest moving objects ever made by the hands of man. Well, we bring you there to Belfast. This ship is being built and designed by its architect, Thomas Andrews. Then we take you to the day of departure and the very optimistic story that was the Titanic. After all, this was the ship of dreams, the rich and famous aboard, the simple immigrants in the third-class cabins that had every expectation of arriving safely in New York and starting their lives new. So the exhibition takes you on that journey, a very optimistic, very exciting, very fun story to begin with. And then, of course, you come into a place like this, the grand staircase of the Titanic. Recreations of a first-class cabin, the Marconi room where the distress signals were sent out, the Veranda Cafe. You'll walk on the bridge of the Titanic and also on the promenade deck. So a complete theatrical story told through theatrical settings, but also always focusing on the real objects that are recovered from the ocean floor. We're standing in one of the galleries now that features so many of the artifacts, and behind me a recreation of a first-class cabin. I had quite the honor and the privilege, really, to get inside of one of those small submersibles and take the 2-hour and 15-minute journey to the bottom of the ocean, the 2.5-mile journey. I'll never forget it, a very cramped quarters. It got very cold inside the sub, and as we finally touched down on the ocean floor, the pilot of the sub turned on the exterior lights, and there in front of me was the bow of the Titanic, that image we're all familiar with. You know, when Titanic basically broke in half at the surface and fell those 2.5 miles to the ocean floor, the front of the ship, the bow, and the stern, when it tore in half, are now separated by about 1/3 of a mile. And you know, Titanic tumbled through the ocean for those 2.5 miles. It could have landed upside down, it could have landed on its starboard side or a port side, but it landed upright on the ocean floor. And I think of all the many things that contribute to the appeal of the Titanic, one of those is how she appears now on the ocean floor 104 years later after the sinking. Speaking of cabins, I'll never forget going right by Captain Smith's cabin. And as you look inside, because the exterior wall has fallen away, so it's almost like a movie set with one wall removed and the camera can come in. Well, there we were looking through the porthole of the submersible into Captain Smith's cabin, his bathtub being there, his bed, and also that doorway that led right to the bridge. Captain Smith had left the bridge on April 14th, 1912, around 9 p.m. at night, and left command to William Murdoch, the artifacts that we're installing today into this exhibition belonging to First Officer Murdoch. Well, as I looked into that cabin of Captain Smith's, you know, he got to the bridge almost immediately. He knew there was a problem. He felt that slight shiver in his ship when it scraped along the iceberg. This is a guy who was the most experienced captain on the seas, the favorite captain, if you will, of the rich and famous. He'd actually retired, but he said to the White Star Line, and he talked it over with his wife, that he would take the Titanic for one final voyage across and to New York, and had every expectation of coming back. But of course we know Captain Smith went down with the ship. As you looked into this cabin, as I looked into this cabin and saw this setting, it was a very emotional moment, a very personal, a very human moment, if you will. And those are the stories that come alive, if you will, here in the exhibition. The true stories of Titanic's passengers, of her crew, and of the sailing of the Titanic told through these real artifacts.
Alexandra Klingelhofer, Vice President of Collections for RMST Premier Exhibitions. We have a mini exhibit here that we've just installed at the Orlando Titanic, the Artifact Exhibition, and it's highlighting objects that we believe are related to First Officer William Murdoch, who was, of course, the officer in charge of the bridge when Titanic hit the iceberg. We have a bag here. It's got the initials WM on it. It's like a toiletry bag, a toiletry kit, so you keep a few things in there that you might need at the ready. Inside of it, we found two buttons that are officers' buttons. The officers were required to purchase their own buttons, and they always had to have spares in case they lost a button. They couldn't, appear on the bridge or in uniform unless they had all the buttons in place, so they carried a few spare with them. Although Officer Murdoch used to sport a handlebar mustache when he got married, suddenly started being clean shaven. It could be his wife's request, or it could be that the Royal Navy Reserves required that all men be either clean shaven or have full beards. Mustaches were not allowed. And so this is a brand new straight razor with its box. It was brand new when it was placed inside the kit. Of course, a shoe brush to keep those shoes bright and shiny. And then we also have a pipe made by Wade, which is a company of fine pipe makers in Leeds in Yorkshire. And this pipe is very similar to one. It's a short-handled pipe of the type seen being held by Officer Murdoch in early photographs. And then finally, a pair of long johns, well worn and darned, but we wouldn't need them today, but for an officer on the bridge was open to the outside air, so it was often quite cold, and long johns would have been one way of staying warm while you were on duty. So looking at them collectively, we've come to the conclusion that these belong to First Officer William Murdoch, one of the active members of the entire story of Titanic and a hero for helping to rescue so many passengers and crew off the ship.